Welcome, everybody. My name is Jason. I use he, him pronouns. This is the most recent installation in the Connecticut DSA Socialist Night School series, a collaborative education series co-hosted by Central Connecticut, Quiet Corner, and Western Connecticut DSAs. As I just said, my name is Jason. I'm on the Central Connecticut DSA Steering Committee and the Bridgeport, and I'm involved in the Bridgeport Mutual Aid Group, as well as I'm on the National DSA Mutual Aid Working Group Steering Committee. I'm going to be co-presenting today with Brian. Brian, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian, he and pronouns. I am a senior at Wesley University. I am active with the YDSA chapter, but I also do some stuff with the broader Central CT chapter, and I am a volunteer with Middletown Mutual Aid, as well as I'm also on the National Mutual Working Group with Jason. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk a little bit about the theory and history and other things about mutual aid and how it plays into a broader strategy for dual power.
Awesome. Glad to have you here, Brian. So we're going to be going over a quick agenda tonight. I'm trying to cover a couple topics. First of all, what is mutual aid? Trying to define that for us. And then what is dual power? Both the history and modern examples, as well as the theories and critiques of both of these. So to get right into it, let's talk about mutual aid. Mutual aid, as defined by the Big Door Brigade out of Seattle, Washington, is a form of political participation in which people take responsibility for caring for one each other and changing political conditions, not just for symbolic acts or putting pressure on their representatives in government, but by actually building new social relations that are more survivable. So that's a little bit of a quote, but I want to break that down a little bit for everybody into the brass tacks of mutual aid as not just something that we do for each other, but as something that is a political act. I think that there are two types of mutual aid that people talk about. There's both the social idea of people doing things for each other out of an act of solidarity, and then there's a political concept of mutual aid as an organizing tactic and strategy. We're going to be talking about both, hopefully, tonight, but I really want to focus on the latter. Mutual aid is something that we do to achieve political ends, not just take care of each other and survive the current conditions. To that end, we need to talk about what mutual aid isn't. Again, from the Big Door Brigade, mutual aid is a term to describe people giving each other needed material support and trying to resist the control dynamics, hierarchies, and system-affirming oppressive arrangements of charity and social services. The reason this distinction is important is because mutual aid is often confused with charity, as we'll get to in another slide, because they are both trying to redistribute resources to people who need them because of our current failing systems. But mutual aid tries to tackle it in a different way. Whereas charity tackles things from a perspective that the people with power get to give resources to the people they decide deserve them, mutual aid tries to create a new system in which people themselves organize to take the resources they need or the resources they have and distribute them in a way that everybody can survive with them or get new resources if that's possible. To that end, let's take a look at comparing and contrasting charity and mutual aid. Charity, as you can see, is a top-down system of resource allocation where people with power and money and resources make decisions about where those resources go, where they are sent to, what people need them, and how much they need them. There's a concept called means testing, which is a system by which people with power and resources will try to figure out how much an individual needs those power and resources. They try to ask questions like, oh, are you a single parent versus a couple? How many kids do you have? Are those kids a certain age? Do you have a job? Do you not have a job? What type of job do you have? These questions are meant to try and weed out people who are deemed undeserving for any variety number of reasons due to immigrant status, addiction status, criminal status, job status, rather than just trusting people for what their needs are that they tell you they are. They also, charity affirms capitalist social relations. This is an important point because as much as I, as a person, have benefited from charity, it's important to recognize that charity as an industry is a means by which the rich and powerful launder their money and reputations in a philanthropic, seemingly humanistic way. So let's look at the opposite of that, mutual aid. Mutual aid is an egalitarian horizontal method of resource allocation. What that means is that the people who need the resources and the people who have the resources come to democratic decisions about where those resources go. It's not just one group of people or one person even deciding what resources are going where. It's the group making democratic decisions to figure out where they want resources to be spent. There's no means testing. We trust what people tell you what they need. And I think this is also an important thing to think about because it is a system built on trust and everybody trying to work together to figure out what the problems in our communities are and how we want to fix them collectively, not just assuming what the problems are and trying to apply our own fixes to them. Most importantly, it is building new social relations rather than relying on the old ones that exist in capitalism. This is very common in a lot of socialist organizing. We want to build a society that we want to live in, so we want that organizing to reflect that. I'm going to pass it over to Brian now to talk about the origins of mutual aid.
Yeah, absolutely. So while a lot of us, I think, especially new to mutual aid work during the pandemic, recognize mutual aid as a part of a revolutionary tradition of radical politics. The theorists that have that we read a lot that have put forth mutual aid as part of this broader strategy definitely drew their theory from indigenous peoples, especially in North America, that have historically practiced forms of mutual aid to sustain their societies. Right here on the slide, you can see we've noted that Marx and Engels, very famously of the Marxist tradition, and Mikhail Bakunin and Peter Kropotkin, who are famous theorists of the anarchist tradition, all of them based their analyses of a form of primitive communism, which is like the idea that communism is sort of in one way or another like very inherently natural to the way the humans used to live before industrialization and development of broader hierarchical systems. The very interesting thing, though, is that their analyses are actually based on ethnographies that were sort of erroneously written by another Morgan, but also we have also records of former colonists of the past, colonizers of the past that have interacted with indigenous peoples and have written a bit about how their sort of confederate structures and structures of like mutual giving have sustained the societies and play a big part in our understanding of what mutual aid is today. If you can go on to the next slide, Jason. The sort of magnum opus in terms of the radical theory on mutual aid is this book called Mutual Aid, A Fact of Evolution by Peter Kropotkin, or some of us affectionately known him as Bread Santa because of his other more famous book, The Conquest of Bread. Anyway, the Kropotkin, what he does in this book that was really, really influential was he provided the biological and scientific grounding for mutual aid as part of why humans have been on the longer stick of the process of evolution and why humans have been able to adapt to our conditions a lot better than the other animals. And he sort of argues the idea that cooperation is as important, if not more, to the development of a species, allowing it to beat out other species in the entire competition of evolution. You see a couple of quotes here talking about referencing other concepts that we've mentioned. Jason, if you can go to the next slide. This is a key quote from the book that talks about how humans through the development of mutual aid, through the development of cooperation on a micro as well as macro level, have made us some of the fittest species to survive. And if you were able to take a look at some of the recommended texts in the Action Network sign up, you'll see this text, Kropotkin Was No Crackpot by Gould, who is another biologist, who, although ultimately sort of disagrees with with Kropotkin's optimistic and some might call utopian reading of human nature, definitely agrees with Kropotkin's first level of Kropotkin's conclusion that that mutual aid definitely assisted the survival of the human species. And now to talk a little bit about some concrete examples and some very famous examples that we know of mutual aid in radical politics, and that is the Black Panthers. Obviously, they began in Oakland as a community defense organization. Community defense here meaning that they would go out on patrols. They would patrol the police to make sure that they weren't brutally killing Black people back then, like as they unfortunately doing again and again today. But we want to mention the concept of community defense here, and you should keep that in mind because as we'll go on to explore, you will see how community defense is, especially to the Black Panthers, is seen as inextricable from the concept of mutual aid. So what they did is they organized free breakfast programs, clinics, as well as ambulances, and they called these survival programs. And these are for African Americans, Black Americans who were many times denied state welfare and were underserved. And we can imagine this to a large part to be kind of intentional on behalf of the state to systematically oppress Black people. And what the Black Panthers did so well was they utilized these programs as opportunities for political education to agitate the Black Americans that they were trying to organize, to sort of instill and try to develop class consciousness, and to show them that there is a concrete way that Black people could build their own future by their own hands, that was separate from the state, and sort of build their own methods for liberation. Yeah, so that's sort of, this slide sort of covers what they have done and how it was incorporated into their theory of change. And then we have a quote here from Fred Hampton that very much touches at the politicization of mutual aid, not only on those who organize and like make a program out of it, but also those who participate in it. And here Fred Hampton is pointing out that people don't even need a very sophisticated understanding of what socialism is. They don't really need to understand like seizing the means of production and wage labor and all of that, right? Because the whole idea is that they, by participating in mutual aid, by helping out their fellow working class member of the community to survive under the brutal conditions of capitalism and the state, they are developing a consciousness of, we are a community and we can help ourselves. And they are becoming and training themselves to be members of a communal society, members of a collective society. And I will pass it back on to Jason to talk a little bit about broader networks and resources for mutual aid.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Brian. So this is a map of, as of, I believe, 2020, I think, COVID-19 mutual aid resources. So you can see in the top here, Mutual Aid Hub. That is the website if you want to look it up. Tries to catalog and list mutual aid groups across the country that have sprung up both in response to COVID and which have resources for people who need them, even if they've existed before that. So as you can see, just in the Northeast alone, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of mutual aid groups, especially centered around the largest cities in the Northeast. You can see in the corner here, Bridgeport, Hartford, Stratford. Technically, Bridgeport Mutual Aid at the time of this list creation was not listed, despite the fact that we've been going since April 2020. But that's good, I think. It means that this is an incomplete list of resources. And as much as a complete list would be helpful, it means that there's even more than what is appearing here. To go to this next slide, you can see here, and we'll be providing these resources for people in an email if people want them. There's a lot of resources that you can find out there for how to find your own mutual aid network, how to start your own if you don't have one. There's manuals, a coronavirus resource kit, immigrant accompaniment networks and COVID-19, beyond prisons, how to support prisoners during the coronavirus crisis, as well as resources on direct action, including rent strikes, wildcat labor strikes, and seizing homes for the homeless. Obviously, this is an incomplete list because there's a lot that people need out there that is not covered in just this. And it's also dated to March 26th of last year. But we wanted to include this as a way to show you that there are things that you can look into now if you do need help. And there's a lot out there to inspire you with if you do want to start something on your own or with a group. I'm going to kick it back to Brian to talk about what mutual aid looks like in Connecticut.
Okay, yeah. So just to give people some concrete examples of what's happening on the ground right now today in Connecticut, the Bridgeport Mutual Aid collective has been going on pretty much since the beginning of the pandemic, and they have a very robust grocery delivery system. They've made over 9,000 deliveries since the beginning of the pandemic, and they've been building aggressively gardens all over Bridgeport, which has been amazing and has been keeping people fed. And we haven't written it on this slide, but I also want to definitely shout out the new program, I believe it's called Fridgeport, which is the construction and installation of community fridges all around the city. And people can definitely PM Reggie, who is messaging in the chat right now to hear more about it, because it's a really, really exciting program. And on the right here, and here I want to tie it back to what we previously discussed with regards to the Black Panthers, which is the politicization of mutual aid and how it is inextricable from other forms of community defense here, such as protecting people from evictions, especially in the heart of winter, where we still see in Connecticut that people, the landlords will not hesitate to kick people out into the dead cold of winter if they don't have the rent during an economic crisis. But Central CT DSA's Housing Justice Project was able to help out and protect tenants from eviction through cooperating with Hartford Mutual Aid and other organizations around the area. And then in other parts of Connecticut, and this is where I've been helping out as well. This photo is actually on the left, is hot off the press from today. Some of our comrades that helped out with that food box distribution are here on the call right now. Shout out to you all for getting this done. But yeah, the Middletown Mutual Aid Collective has been fundraising for direct cash assistance to Middletown residents in need, and we've also operated a community fridge since November last year, and it's been we're trying to get aid directly to people and as quick as possible, as directly as possible, no questions asked. Going back to what Jason said before, our direct cash assistance program has no means testing. It's first come, first served, and all we require is that someone be a resident of Middletown. Again, and going back to the politics side of it, we see that their tenant union just formed a couple of weeks ago over in Millbrook Village, and this is very, very exciting. With the support of Hartford DSA organizers, a brand new tenant union was formed, and we're seeing tenants stepping up and organizing together as a community for their own needs. And to show landlords that that when tenants have the power and they put themselves together, they can definitely they have the right to challenge for their own welfare. So definitely stay tuned to that, because I'm really excited for one to see what will happen to that tenant union. And now, as we step into a little bit more of a political discussion of mutual aid, we're going to be listing here some sort of common critiques of mutual aid as a revolutionary strategy, and they're all like really valid critiques. And I think there are criticisms that are important for those of us that are believers and are organizers of mutual aid, to hold ourselves accountable to the work we do and to the world that we are trying to build. We even in the short 1 year that mutual aid collectives have proliferated all across the country, we have seen some of these characteristics start to emerge, and in particular, we see that because mutual aid is a very easy place for newly radicalized people to step into radical work, but also it is exactly because the bar of entry is so low that it is very easy to just jump into the work and like do it and help people without really understanding what the politics behind it are, which is the politics of horizontal organizing, of restorative justice, and all of that. And if people start doing that without this kind of understanding, then it becomes very easy to start enhancing hierarchies that are already present. And this is particular to those of us that have the time and energy to help out. A lot of us maybe come from slightly better means. We have access to a car. We don't have to struggle to pay rent, and we see that a gap starts to occur between the organizers and the people that are receiving the aid. And then at one point, you start to become indistinguishable from a charity, and that is a very easy pitfall to fall into. Without the extensive understanding of how you need to continue expanding as a network to recruit those you are helping into your network and empower them to help out their neighbors as well. So keep all of these in mind as we go deeper into a discussion of broader dual power strategies. So we will start talking about dual power and the politics of mutual aid. So now, what is dual power? We see here this little graphic of a seesaw, and that is because the way we understand dual power, at least here in DSA, is that there is a tension between the current dominant systems of power, including capitalism, heteropatriarchy, white supremacy, and the state, that not only oppress us in all these different ways, but also present to us a specific way of doing change. They present to us the correct ways, the effective ways of doing change that are supposedly, time after time have been told to us is the only correct way to do things. And these include things like voting in politicians, petitioning the legislature for certain bills. And what we see here on the side, on the right side, counterbalancing all of those is things like community gardens, community-owned energy, worker co-ops, and also tenant unions and community assemblies. And what dual power is building these counter power institutions to say, okay, we don't have to just wait 4 years and vote in the new politician. We can start building the new world that we want to see right now through these institutions, and through growing these institutions, we can demonstrate to people that these things work and start to delegitimize what the state tells us are the correct ways to advocate for change and to build change. If you can go on to the next slide, Jason, here are a couple other graphics that sort of show all of the components that compose dual power and how mutual aid is one of these very important pillars, as much as tenant unions and worker co-ops and as we just said, community defense. All of these things are inextricable from each other as just part of a wider network of different people from different backgrounds coming together to prefigure the society that we want to build. A popular saying that you might have heard practitioners of mutual aid say is, quote, "the germ of the new society within the shell of the old." And what this means is, as we still live in the shell of what we perceive as, or should be, the old society. We are growing the germ of the new society by living out the radical politics right now, today, through mutual aid, through all of these different strategies that we just talked about. And what is so special about mutual aid specifically is that we are meeting the basic needs of a community directly, and we are showing the community that these basic needs can be met on a local level by the communities themselves. Again, divesting from the state and showing that we do not need to rely on the state. And hopefully, when these dual power institutions get big enough, they get strong enough, they actually challenge and rival state institutions. And and hopefully, as we go more and more, we go bigger and bigger, these dual power, these state institutions that we're trying to defeat will collapse and fade away as they show themselves to be illegitimate and be built on exploiting other people as well. And yeah, so we want to show here on the slide that the idea, again, that institutions should be alternative to the current state institutions, solidarity through struggle, which means that it is exactly through organizing with these comrades, through organizing within your community, through neighbors that you perhaps have never met before. You build grassroots power together. You get to know who exactly you are organizing with. You know exactly, when the time comes to displace the state, you should know the people that you are displacing the state with. And that's why actually getting out there and connecting with them is so important. And as we head towards a socialist horizon, in the short term, these victories not only improve people's material conditions, and it gives people more time, more space, and more energy to fight for even more radical reforms and build more radical institutions that continue displacing the state. And in the long term, it shows people, it teaches people how to build this new society they will want to create. Because when we redistribute wealth, when we start fighting these powers, we don't just suddenly learn how to live in a utopian society, as people say, because we have never, all of us grow up in this capitalist society. We grow up thinking that some jobs, some collective labor society can just be sold off and be done by people of a certain economic class, of a certain racial class. But no, we understand that a communist future or a socialist future needs the input of all of us and needs all of us to carry on some of that dirty work. And doing mutual aid right now trains us as people to be able to take on all of this work and distribute it communally in a way that is egalitarian. And we will now pass it back on to Jason to talk a little bit more about theory and history.
Yes, and thank you for that training comment. I really like that framing. So I get to introduce the spicy slide that everybody loves, because these are two figures who are not normally appearing next to each other anywhere. Certainly not because they agree on anything, usually. But we want to talk about it a little bit because I think it's important for conceptualizing exactly how universal a theory of dual power can be, that it can sort of cross ideological divides even among the left. So Pierre-Joseph Proudhon was a French anarchist and socialist theorist who obviously lived in the time of French Revolution from 1809 to 1865 when he was killed. And obviously, he is an anarchist who believed in non-state solutions to capitalism and the growing industrialization of the state in Europe. And on the right, we have Vladimir Lenin, the famous Russian revolutionary who overthrew the Tsar in Russia and helped found the Soviet Union. Now, obviously, these are two very opposing figures, but one of the things that they shared was a view on the construction of power for the working class or for the oppressed, independent of the existing mode of power. To go to the next slide, this is a quote from Lenin, which I won't read out, but the thing I think that is very important to take away from it is that Lenin himself was advocating for a system of organizing, particularly in this quote, during the revolution, that was not through the current means by which workers and oppressed people were allowed to take power. First of all, he was organizing this sort of dual power structure in the form of the Bolshevik Party, separate from the sort of official methods of political organizing in the Russian Empire. That would be the Duma, the legislature. And his conception was that the workers and people and soldiers, deputies, the Soviet assemblies, would be the method by which a new society would be founded, a communist society. So we could also look at mutual aid in the context of revolutions elsewhere. In Spain in 1936, the anarchist trade union, the CGT, I think I'm saying that right, or the CNT rather, the CNT, or the Congress of General Trade Unions, I think, participated in the Spanish Revolution and the Catalan Revolution, and actually took control of the means of production in the forms of industrial assemblies and workers' communes, both in rural society and in the cities, constructing a new society that was democratically managed. And as you can see here, this quote from Gaston Laval, they actually replaced the war between men, survival of the fittest, by the universal practice of mutual aid, which is important to consider, considering they were literally at war with other men in the form of the Francoist regime and the nationalists. We're also going to look at recent theorists and strategists of dual power. So we have two faces here: Murray Bookchin, an American theorist of anarchism and socialism and social ecology, who died in 2006, and a student of his, Abdullah Öcalan, who is currently alive today in a prison in Turkey. Abdullah Öcalan is a formerly Marxist-Leninist Kurdish revolutionary who has, for most of his life, been fighting against the Turkish state and their oppression of Kurdish people, who has, since his imprisonment, embraced libertarian socialism of Murray Bookchin and advocated for a non-state solution to both the Kurdish national question and the fight for liberation there, and the fight against capitalism in general. We're going to look quickly at a quote from Apo, from Abdullah, which is about Rojava in northern and eastern Syria, one of the many Kurdish majority areas in that region, talking about how the autonomous, multi-ethnic, multi-religious self-administration there, based on his concept of genealogy, the liberation of women, where that has built up its own power base among the people there to resist both the incursion of the Turkish state, the Assad regime in Syria, as well as the Islamic State's attempts to overthrow both of those. So in this, we wanted to really highlight that there is not really a unified theory of dual power such that only one group of people in the left owns it. There are many conceptions of how dual power can function. And it is really a very universal theory that has been applied in many different contexts across socialist revolutionary politics in the history of the world. So I'm going to kick it back to Brian to talk about some concluding thoughts.
Thank you for the wonderful theory breakdown. Yeah, so just a few points to sum up before we jump into our discussion questions. Want to heavily emphasize mutual aid is a form of should be a form of political participation, and it is exactly the politicization of service work that makes it distinct from charity. Mutual aid can also serve as a source for political capacity building. And what that means is, again, yes, exactly, thinking back to the Black Panthers and how they use their survival programs as explicit methods to build their party, to spread their program, and to politically agitate people, to instill class consciousness. Mutual aid is a way to make a community collectively realize not only just their responsibilities to each other, but also their capacity to survive together as a community and not rely on methods that implicate, systems of oppression, and not rely on, not beg the state to give them, crumbles from whatever's left after giving to corporations and billionaires. And finally, mutual aid has its own set of challenges and complications, like all of the other organizing tactics and strategies that socialists and anarchists use. And with mutual aid, I think we should definitely keep those in mind, especially as we see over the last year, over the pandemic, it was through a crisis of capitalism that many people are now sort of awakened to this new reality, but also awakened to new opportunities that strategies like mutual aid give us. And it is exactly because we are all jumping into what has been a historically rich and diverse tradition, going from the radical organizing of the CNTFAI to the Black Panthers to indigenous peoples, that we should understand our place in this history, and hopefully build on the success of previous generations of previous radicals and create new opportunities for the future.
Awesome, and can cover some discussion questions now. So we figure we could talk about this, either type stack in the chat or answer in the chat if you feel inspired to, or you can use the Q&A feature to offer your own questions that hopefully we can tackle and discuss together. I'll also be stopping the recording momentarily so that people can feel free to talk. The discussion questions include: how can mutual aid build power? If you read the suggested readings on the Action Network sign up, I might recommend Vicko Alvarez's piece from Chicago DSA on how their work has built working class power in the South Side. What can mutual aid look like in non-mutual aid specific organizing, that is, non-mutual aid project organizing? And this includes tenant organizing, union organizing, and anything else. And then what challenges does mutual aid organizing face, and how can we overcome those challenges? As Brian said, like any other form of organizing, mutual aid has its own challenges, both specific and general, that do need to be overcome, and we do need to keep them in mind to make sure that our organizing is both effective and so thank you everybody for joining us. There are some next steps we would appreciate everybody to follow up with. First of all, join the CCT DSA Mutual Aid Working Group meeting, inaugural meeting, which will be to be determined, announced in May. You will get an email about it, I promise. But me and Brian decided amongst ourselves, at least, that this would be a great chance to follow up with everybody and really get started on coordinating mutual aid in the DSA in Connecticut. Second, if you're not already a member of DSA, make sure you join dsausa.org/join. Probably should have added that at the beginning of the presentation, but oh well.